Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Leveraging Retrieval-Augmented Generation, or also known as RAG, for enhanced content creation. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out after the event. All attendees are in mute mode and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions, use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer questions as they are submitted. If there are questions we are not able to get to, we will answer those via email after the webinar. I'd like to introduce our two presenters for today, Keith Parent, CEO and co-founder of CourtSquare Group, and Brian Reynolds, CEO of Doxonomy. Keith, take it away.
Thank you, Roy. Hi, everybody. My name is Keith Parent. I'm the CEO of CourtSquare Group. We are a managed service firm. We manage infrastructure for life science companies. Specifically, any application all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. We can host any of those applications. We have been really focused in the clinical and regulatory space. So understanding 21 CFR Part 11, understanding bringing those tools together is really important to what we do and how we do that. So part of what we do is we integrate multiple applications together within those same environments. So finding a company like Doxonomy that we can work with hand in hand to do some of the tools that we bring to the market is really important to us. And I'll talk about that a little bit when Brian and I get into this presentation. But I will hand it over to Brian now to introduce himself, and then we can go from there. Brian?
Great, Keith. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, nice to have all of you on. Looking forward to talking about this particular process. We've had a series of these webinars going, and of course, those are available on the CourtSquare website if you want to go back and watch some of the other ones. This one today, we're going to be talking about retrieval-augmented generation, ultimately dealing with generative AI and how can we do that in a controlled manner. I'm with Doxonomy, as stated before. I've been in this industry for quite some time, 30 years now. I've been dedicated my entire career to dealing with unstructured data, structured as well, but primarily unstructured data, working with all kinds of different systems on a global scale. And we're very excited about talking about today.
Great.
So with that said, Keith, why don't you, do you want to get us kicked off in our...
I will. So I want to give everybody a little story to start. You know, I tend to lead my company by telling stories, and I'll give everybody a story. Why did CourtSquare and Doxonomy kind of get together, and how did that happen? Well, it's important to note that I look at AI with a very skeptical term. We're still in very much of a hype cycle, and people are really doing a lot of proof of concept projects out there, and they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to understand what it can do and how it can do it. We have a content repository called RegDocs 365. So we have for many years, we're going on about 13, 14 years now, of dealing with TMF data, EDM reference model data that we're using for drug submissions to the FDA or EU authorities. We also have our life science basic module that goes across all departments in the company. So we've got documents and content across a wide range of things. Somebody asked us a question that's something we didn't anticipate. They said, can we search in both Japanese and English and find those documents? Well, it's something that I hadn't tackled before. And I was at an RSIDM meeting and knew of Doxonomy and Brian. So luckily I was able to kind of go up to Brian and say, Brian, here's an issue that I've had with clients and they've asked me for this. Is this something you guys could do? And the nice part is we already had full text searching and metadata and keyword searching within RegDocs, but it was good, but it wasn't great. And it's like, what can we do to make it better? It didn't solve the question that people were asking us. So when I talked to Brian, he gave me the rundown. We looked at what he had going on, and there were so many advantages to what I could do by incorporating Doxonomy into what we did with RegDocs that all of a sudden it just made a heck of a lot of sense for us to get out there and, you know, join forces and work together and bring a much more comprehensive tool to the table for our client base. And since that meeting and since going through some of these things, we've been able to add in, because of Doxonomy, the whole multi-language capabilities that we talked about from a searching perspective, similarity searching, AI-based search mechanisms, all the different things that you hear people talking about. The whole Doxonomy team has already started to continue to add new functionality on a very regular basis. I was just watching one of the webinars we did recently, and I saw that I use my hands way too much. So I gotta try to hold my hands down as I'm doing this stuff as we go through. But Brian, I think, based on that first conversation you and I had, what was your thought about the fact that we had lots of content and you had great algorithms? I thought it was a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree 100% because what I saw was, we've put this platform together, but platform is one thing, right? Technology is great. It's wonderful. It can do all kinds of amazing things. And of course, me being a very technology centric person, I love to lead with technology, but it really boils down to use cases and how do we solve problems for customers. And that was a specific use case that started out this whole discussion between you and I over, almost a year and a half or so ago, where we started to integrate these things together. And it was around being able to look at and interpret content that was in a different language in another language, right? I want to start in English or maybe in Spanish or French, and I want to search Japanese or Korean or whatever. It's having that ability to do that. That was a use case that was a problem. And of course, we've uncovered so many more use cases in how we deal with this. I think what might be helpful for those that are on is let's walk through and talk about what does that mean? Like, what is intelligence and what does it really mean? And how does that affect me? And how can I implement and set this up? Because we've made it quite easy to do that.
And I think it's important, Brian, to note for people that don't understand, because we have an audit-ready compliant cloud, and our RegDocs platform sits within that cloud environment, we come in audit-ready. So incorporating Doxonomy within our Arc cloud with our RegDocs platform puts us behind a firewall, puts us behind a regulatory compliant interface that gives that customer the peace of mind to know that from a regulatory compliance standpoint, they're covered. We're going to handle all of that for them. So all the tools that we're developing, all the functionality that we have, we can hook into anything they need, but stay regulatory compliant.
That's exactly right.
It's a huge point in the life science world.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And we've done all that work, and it makes it very easy for them. Let's kind of dive forward into a couple slides. I don't want to do that. Let's get into a demo as well. Let's kind of walk those that are on through what we've got here. So I'm going to go ahead and advance forward. So the first thing to talk about, so today we're talking about, RAG, they call it, the RAG process. People have probably heard the term a lot, right? It stands for Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And well, what does that really mean? The simplicity of that, like simplistically, what does that mean is it's all great that we have these AI generation tools and everybody's excited about them. And companies, as Keith said earlier, are using them and integrating them in and doing POCs. We've done all kinds of POCs and we've got so many opportunities going on with different companies looking at this. But the problem is it by themselves, they're a little rogue, right? They're a little crazy. They can hallucinate. They can create results that look right, but aren't right, that kind of situation. So where RAG comes into play is where you can begin to utilize the data that you already have in your organization and help drive process around that so that it can be repeatable, it can be scalable, it can be controllable. It becomes part of the regulatory or regulated, if you will, process and how you generate new content, and you have much more success with a human still being at the end of the loop, right? Looking at it and understanding it. So within our engine, we have the ability to very easily connect to your repositories. We have the ability to interpret like a human would the language that's being written, again, regardless of what language it's in. We handle over 104 languages. We have the ability to look at content in a vision standpoint, so like images and videos and things like that. We can auto-classify and we can sort through and we can extract metadata dynamically without a human having to do it. We can transcribe, translate, we can do similarity, and then, of course, generate net new content. And we'll look at that as we go through the presentation today and the demo. But
it's important, Brian, when you're talking about these different areas, some people may think of one different thing or think of one area because they need that particular thing. But all of a sudden you start to think of things when you introduced me to the whole concept of the similarity searching, and I start to think about some of the IDMP functionality that you're looking at out of the EU, I think that it's important that people start to tie some of those capabilities together. and
Right.
understand, oh, maybe I can look through all of my documents and I can come up with common language between different things. You know,
Exactly.
we had a conversation earlier where, you know, I'm working with a group of companies that are doing some mental health work. And one of the things that they want to do is they want to take write-ups coming from different people in the mental health field. Well, the reality is if I go into an emergency room and I'm talking to one doctor talking to another on a trauma situation, they have a very distinct language. It's very easy to pull those words out and know exactly what they're trying to do. But if
Exactly.
I do that on the mental health side, everybody describes things a little bit differently. If we can use AI to help kind of use that similarity search and bring these things together, all of a sudden it's sort of unlocks ability for us to compare and contrast how different people look at mental health. So those are the kind of things that we as practitioners in the industry start thinking about. I take a company like Doxonomy, who's very focused in on the technology behind that, and then I work with some of these companies that are focused in on the health side of it, the life science side of it. All of a sudden, it's like magic, the stuff we can come up with that you say, oh, well, if I can do this, what can I get out of it? So it's great that Brian and I have thought this, and we can bring it to a lot of people.
Right. You're exactly right. And it's being able to create, being able to interpret and understand and create that commonality, right, with similarity in that case, in that particular use case, to deal with anything that comes at you. And the beauty is, because of the power of the way we do what we do, you can get new things that come along because things change, right? Over time, the way things are done change over time, and the system automatically adapts, to those changes. It picks up on those. It'll be aware of them in many cases before others might be aware of them, because things will pop out and become aware to the knowledge worker, the human in the loop. We always have a human in the loop, but they'll be aware of that. So yes, absolutely.
Right.
I think another aspect of what we talk about when it comes to this is people say, well, that's great, but I have this sort of crazy world of, lots of different systems scattered all over. Depending on the size of the organization, it could be a dozen, but it could be hundreds, right? I mean, it could be thousands, right? In big companies that we work with. How do I, get information and knowledge out of these systems without changing them? I don't want to migrate everything into one system, because that's not going to work. I have business processes that are built on all these different applications. And so that's the beauty of the way we approach it with this solution. We have point and click connectors that allow you to easily configure and set up and point to a repository, crawl that data without ever affecting it or changing it or manipulating it in any way. It's all read-only access, but then we can gain the intelligence and maintain a pointer back to the source repository and point you back to it. So if you have data in Viva, or you have it in RegDocs, or you have it in SharePoint or Documentum, that's all fine. All those systems can continue to do what they do. We can index them and then point you back to them, because that's part of the RAG process, right? The RAG process has a lot to do with, okay, I've generated something with AI, maybe ChatGPT type thing, right? One of these type of large language models. How do I vet and verify what was generated? Where did it come from? What are its sources, right? And we need to be able to trace back. And that's what our solution does, right? It traces back and keeps track of where that intelligence came from. And so you have that common sort of reportable, auditable way of going back and looking at things.
It's interesting, Brian, when I talk to different potential customers, we talk about the environments they're in, and they get, well, I'm a Viva shop, so I don't really need what you got. Or I do this, or I do that. And I look at them and say, well, time out. I said, I don't need you to use RegDocs to put in our life science basic, or put in eTMF, or put in the EDM reference model. But what if you're going to pull data out of something and you want to manipulate it before you put it back somewhere? You need to have a platform to be able to do some of that work. RegDocs is a perfect platform to be able to manipulate, work on data. We can put workflows around that data. So when we find things within certain areas, it's a great way to connect up multiple different systems that may have data in different systems. We've talked to a number of companies about pulling data out of 4 or 5 different legacy systems and then shoving that into a RIM system. Wouldn't that be great if you could do that without having to put together a custom solution to be able to do that? This thing can do it automatically by pulling out, identifying metadata, do similarity searching, and then pulling that data together and being able to do some of that work. Those are the things that I think about as a technology guy when I look at these. And I was really thrilled, after I found doxonomy and the stuff it could do with the multi-language stuff, all of a sudden, when Brian talked to me about all these pre-built crawlers and all these connectivity options that we had, it kind of expanded my thinking around, well, how can we interface with these other applications to pull stuff in and be able to use that? Most people aren't going to think about that because they're so focused on just doing their own business, or they're so set in their ways around what they want. We can actually work with companies to identify and come up with a solution you may not have thought about.
Right. That's exactly right.
You know, one of the other areas I think, Brian, that's really important, you've got on that last slide there, you've got Gmail and you got Outlook. I can tell you, I can almost guarantee that 80 to 90% of the companies that we work with, in some way or form, they're using email as a default file share.
Right.
And what better way to be able to pull stuff out of that information and be able to use that than to be able to suck into a Gmail infrastructure or an Outlook database to pull out some of those messages and be able to use those and be able to do something with those. People don't think about that, but that's a huge area that is often overlooked.
Right, it is, and we go so deep in the way we process that type of data to bring that intelligence forward. You know, it's not just the mail message itself, which some systems can search on, right? But it goes into the attachments that are embedded, and if there are things embedded in attachments, right? Embedded objects within objects that are already in, you know, that kind of sort of nesting, right? We understand and interpret that relationship and all of that data, and it becomes part of your intelligence to drive that process forward.
And I don't know how many people in the audience can actually see themselves in this use case, but we've had many times where one company has bought another compound, or they've migrated data over from a CRO. And what do they end up getting? They end up getting this huge PST file that has all sorts of mail messages in it, not just the ones that are tied to their trial, but all sorts of messages in there. What are they going to do with that? Somebody's got to go through that. Somebody's got to do something with that. This tool can actually go in and pull everything out of that, not only the messages, but as Brian suggests, the attachments inside attachments. All those things can happen with the tool, and it'll make your life that much easier when you're searching for things, particularly around those drugs that you want to be able to do some work on.
Right. And that actually gets into, you know, the doing that, right? That aspect gets into auto classification, the ability to go in and pull those attachments out, pull that mess out, right? That's there, and interpret it in some way that is standardized and controlled in the way that it's set up for your organization, and be able to sort it, right? And so, you know, we have the ability, it's just one of many things that are in there, the ability to streamline and automate that process of classification and sorting it all out. We train models on that. We'll actually see that in the demo. We'll get in and take a look at where those get set up. But then as we crawl that PST, it sorts everything out, as you just said, and classifies it into neat little, you know, buckets. And then of course we have, like, for instance, with the eTMF stuff we're working on right now, right? We can identify all the various artifacts for the TMF, auto classify all that, and dynamically move it right into the location it needs to be, whether it's in RegDocs or even if they want it pushed into another repository like a Viva or whatever, we can do that as well. Those kind of automated steps of making sure all that just happens consistently the same way over and over.
You know, in this industry, one of the big things that I talk a lot about when people talk about AI, I say that AI for itself, you can hire great data scientists, you can hire all these guys that understand AI, but unless you have the subject matter expertise to understand what it is you're pulling out of it, it's that marriage of the AI, data science knowledge, and the subject matter expertise. You want to bring in your clinical people, you want to bring in your regulatory people, because they need to be part of that. That human in the loop aspect is so important, particularly when you're dealing with machine learning and you're trying to train those models.
Yep.
If you're putting the wrong train the model incorrectly, which is why we want to use those people that really understand it to actually help with that training methodology. So exactly. I think that's important when we're bringing those to bear.
Right. And we've made that so easy. In fact, I think if we switch into a demo, we can let people see what it looks like, how easy we've made it for the end user to set these up. I'm going to shift screens here for a second. Demo. Let's go over here. So from within the interface, we've made it very easy to set up and configure these types of things that we're talking about. So when we're talking about, again, about doing this type of processing, this RAG processing, right, that we're talking about, how do I go about getting started? Well, we've made it all point and click. So we start from here, we'll go in basically onto this side. We'll see that what we can easily do is go in and we have what we call crawlers. We talked about that slide with all the craziness. You can set up and configure these things. You can have as many of these as you need, and you set them up. I'll just take a look at one of them. For example, this one's a file share one. You simply give it a name. You determine, do you want to keep native content or not? By default, you don't, but you want to keep it in a synchronized state, or do you want to archive it? I mean, there's all these sort of things that you can set up. How do you want it to get classified? What
And I
type
think,
of...
Brian, if I'm going to interrupt you for a second, two things I want to make sure that people understand. We do have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question you want to put into that Q&A, you click on the Q&A, put it in there, and we can answer those questions. I will be monitoring the Q&A so that I can interrupt Brian like I just did.
Yep.
And secondly, when I look at what Brian is showing you right now with the crawlers and the different types of things right there, if you have a question about your type of data, please ask it, because we can answer that right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do crawl over 150 different systems. So, there's probably not a system that you have that we can't, connect to unless it's custom. And we have ways of dealing with that as well. So, we haven't come across anything we haven't been able to gain intelligence on. But yeah, you can set up your security permissions, who can see what, because that's always a question that comes up. How often does this run? How greedy is it, on the network and things like that? You can schedule it to run monthly, daily. You can have it run very next to real time, every 15 minutes or so, to pick up changes. It can run in full mode or delta mode. So meaning that, am I looking just for what's been added, what's been removed, what's changed? Or am I just bringing everything over and looking at it? Usually that's the first time you crawl. You can set up your dynamic linking, and then you set up what do you want to crawl? Where do you want to crawl? And what specifically? You can isolate by MIME type. Do I want to just crawl PowerPoint or Word or PDF, things like that? You can set up custom MIME types. You can exclude things. Say, I want to crawl everything but this, right? That kind of scenario. But it's all point and click. That's the beauty. This doesn't require any development work, any technical understanding. As long as you can put in the credentials, the information that's needed, you just fill this out and you set up these crawlers and they can go off and do their job.
And what's nice is you guys don't even have to do that. We can actually do that for you as part of setting it up. So you just tell us what you have. We'll set that all up for you. That's part of the process.
Yep.
If you don't want to do it, if you want us to teach you how to do it, we can do that as well. Brian, I wanted to also mention that we've done a series of these webinars talking about RAG and talking about AI and some of the things. We did an intelligent archiving discussion earlier on. So when you talk about keeping content or synchronized active archive mode, there's a way that you can actually take all of your old systems, your legacy systems, actually index them through this process, and then decommission those old systems and shut them down, but you'd still have access to all of the data within those systems. That's just, and you can go back and look at that webinar that we did a few months ago that talks specifically about that. A great way for you to save money, actually to pay for the ability to move forward with new solutions that you want to put into your environment.
Oh yeah, I mean we've got several of these going on. Archiving state, where they're using the intelligent archiving aspect to decommission legacy systems. Comes up in migrations when you have to go through your validated migration to move from system A to system B, or upgrade from system A to system B. Whatever the case may be. You always have that concept of the legacy data. What do I do with it? Where do I put it? And it gets left in these expensive systems. And we have one customer that we were working with, right, that was spending $700,000 a year on a legacy system that we're able to literally eliminate and create ROI in less than 2 months, just by bringing it into the intelligent system, and we can handle those kinds of things. So yeah, there is a webinar on that, so recommend that. We talked a little bit about auto classification, and how easy is it to set up auto classification? I have all these different content types. So how are you going to crawl those and interpret and understand that to drive process forward? Well, it's, again, as I said, another point and click sort of solution. We have many different types that come with the package. So it's all pre-built in, that have been pre-trained, that we already know and understand quite well. And you'll get that as part of, you know, a solution going forward. But we've also made it very easy to add new ones. You literally just create a new type, give it a name, give it a description, select your samples that you want to use to train on. We have a minimum of 25. We like to get as many as we can, but you click, select, upload, and then hit train system. In a matter of minutes, you've got a new class type available. And you
Can we
say,
talk a little bit about that, Brian? Because I think
sure,
there are organizations out there that many life science companies belong to, and they've come out with a sample set of documents. And maybe it's your Word templates that you use, or maybe it's Transcelerate templates, or maybe it's other templates that are out there. If you have those, you can actually use that and feed that in as part of your training data, can't you?
absolutely, yep. Mhm.
So just think about that. Tell us a little bit more about under that description. I see some really familiar documents. Did you guys get these from some source? How'd you guys pull those in?
Yeah, what we've been doing over the years is actually culling and collecting, you know, data that happens to be in the public domain. So, you know, we don't utilize any proprietary data from any of our customers unless they would grant us access to be able to do that, right? And that would be, you know, a discussion that we would have. But anything that's publicly available, we've collected and we've done training on those, and we're always constantly upgrading and adding new things that you know, it's part of the process, right?
So if you think about your own company, if you have hundreds of thousands or millions of documents sitting there, think about the types of things that this system could actually do for your own documents, and just categorizing your own documents to be able to put already ones that you could actually use right out of the gate to recognize as it's going through and categorizing.
That's true. And the beauty is the auto classification is a starting point, right? We need to know what kind of content it is, because each piece of content, right, each type of document is different in what you want to get out of it, right? An SMPC is very different from, say, study protocol, right? And how we interpret the intelligence in it, you know, is important to know what it is in order to do that. And that actually leads to a perfect example. Let's do a quick search. Um, what did I say? Zyduo. I think that's it. Nope, I didn't spell it right. Nope, let's do it this way. Here we go. Zigduo. That was my thing. All right. So Zigduo is an example. So this happens to be just basically a label that we pulled out. Not quite where I was going to go with the demo, but we'll start with that since we're here. And then I'll go back and we'll kind of continue in. We analyze and process not only documents, PDFs and Word and, you know, all that kind of stuff, but also image-based data. So in this case, this is a label, you know, that we can deal with, and we can deal with label artwork. This is a JPEG. But not only do we process, you know, what's on that label, we understand the text that's on it, right? Exactly. So we lift that off. This is an image that all becomes part of what is searchable and usable as intelligence. We extract the barcode. So any barcode information, we pick up that data. We know that becomes usable. And we also know from other imaging components that, you know, its strength, its barcode, you know, its drug name, and so forth, right? So information, you know, that you can configure and set up. And this is set up for that. And what we can see here, though, is that this came from an actual prescribing information guide. This is children documents, if you will, that are embedded in the actual document itself. And we pull that out and it becomes part of the index. So very powerful in what type of intelligence that we gather. But I'll go back to my search and do my Zigduo, now that I spelled it right. And you can see here we get back a series of results that come back, and you'll notice that, you know, we've got prescribing information. That was an auto classification. We got an SMPC. We've got, you know, image labels, those embedded. They're being pulled back because they were identified, even though they're images. We picked up on that keyword, you know, that we actually happened to search on. We've got some pills here that are in here. You'll notice over here we have aggregators. These aggregators are dynamically extracted intelligence that comes out of that. So while we're looking at files or in the context of files and we're thinking about unstructured data, what is the intelligence that's actually being pulled out? That shows up over here. We can see the different countries that are mentioned, within this content, and we can filter on those and use those as filter attributes to be able to sort and narrow down, what we're looking for. We can also put this into sort of an insights view. You'll see here, because of the intelligence, and this is a demo environment, we can look at data in a visual sense, right? No longer documents, but actual data elements that are within the content. Most mentioned country, Germany, right? 5 mentions, that came across that. Different extension types, patient age data, stuff like that. These are, obviously demo environment and stuff that we set up, but it's all configurable as part of the platform. Very point and click, very easy to set up these dashboards. We can also extend this into things like Tableau or Power BI. So we've done that with other customers where they begin to do time series analysis of data elements and look for new types of indications or, all kinds of really great things that can come by crawling this content and gaining that level of intelligence from that unstructured data. Does that make sense?
I think it makes great sense. And I think that most people, when they think about a search tool or they think about anything, the last thing in their mind is coming up with all these charts around the documents or the data that's actually embedded within those documents. So that's fantastic, Brian. But,
Right.
I think when I think about things like this, things that come to mind for me are, what about adverse events and being able to do an AE adjudication system? If I need to go through all these documents that are coming in, can I do that? And can I push those off to the people that are doing adjudication? I love the fact that you can look for certain things, or it can already identify and classify based on some of those terminology.
Yeah, so a great example of that, you talked about adverse events. So not only can we crawl unstructured repositories and extract that insight, we can call structured repositories as well. And in this case, this is the FAIRS adverse event database that we pulled in a segment of it. I don't think we pulled the whole thing in, but for demo purposes. So we could do a query, and what comes back here are actually records that are within a database. And so I'll click on one and open it up. And we brought some of the properties back. We can bring back any data elements. This gets into structured. So we have a grid-based review. So we can actually, deal with nested tables, if you will, like join and inner joins and all that kind of crazy stuff. But you'll also see here that for this adverse event that occurred, in this case, which happens to be death, right?
That's pretty adverse.
Yeah, pretty adverse. We see the drug that's related to it, that's tied. That's a relationship that occurred. And from there, we could jump to that and we see, what's associated with it from a relationship standpoint. And any elements or attributes about it. And then we can also see for this drug, all the other adverse events that are associated with that same drug or ingredients and things of that nature. So that type of analysis can be done. And we can also tie this back to source unstructured data and identify those relationships as well. So yeah, very powerful in what we're able to do with intelligence by crawling all of those different systems in an organization.
Brian, could you go back to that search screen and show us again how you can choose the different sources?
Absolutely, yeah. So from a searching standpoint, I mean, that's one of the powerful things when you crawl content and you create this, what we call a small language model. It's really an index of your data, the customer's data, so that that intelligence exists. It comes back to being able to search across it as well. And you can isolate that and identify how do you want to search for that data. And this is all configurable, point and click, as we said. We could have show me all my Documentum repositories. Maybe I only want to search that. Or I want to search Documentum and I want to search my Kappa archive. I could do that as well. Or I can search everything. But the idea is that you can pick and choose how you want to come at and look at and analyze your data.
I think what's important though, Brian, is for people to realize you can have multiple systems in there. So you have your own systems that could be in different systems altogether. You could have multiple systems. Let's say I have a legacy quality database, and I have a new quality database. I could search across both of those. What if I now want to look at both my data that's internal to us, but I want to look at publicly available data that you just mentioned? We could actually do that. So you could see yourself against publicly available data and start to see, how do I fit in with that? It just seems so powerful to me that people could actually do some of that stuff. And the tool itself will actually start to tie those things together.
Automatically tie those relationships together, the intelligence behind it. And this is all super important, because really what this does is this really drives forward the generation side. So we've talked about crawling many different repositories, gaining an understanding and intelligence around a company's, knowledge, right? They're truly their knowledge network, which, today most companies don't tap into. I think 80% of a company's data is unstructured data is sort of the rule of thumb today. And what we've learned recently, actually as recent of last year, and some studies that were done about, of all the data that's flowing into a company, only about 10% of it is actually getting used to drive process forward. All of that 90% of data that is coming through in all different forms isn't being used to help drive better business decisions, streamline how you do things, simplify how, content's created, and so forth. But now that we crawl all of that, what does it mean to generate something new? How do we tie it into a RAG process? And so I'm going to switch to a different screen now and just kind of walk us through how that can be configured. What does a data flow mean? Like, how do I go from auto-classified content to generating something new? Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to switch over to this screen. It's a configuration screen where we would set these up. I've got some sample ones here for demonstration purposes, and I'm going to focus in on one here called Allersolve, which is literally a fake product that we use for demo purposes. So we don't want to show any kind of information for any customers or anything. So what you'll see here is, in this case, we're working with core data sheets. So this is labeling related, it's regulatory labeling. But in the labeling space, we might need to generate SMPCs and USPIs and all different kinds of outputs by the various different agencies that are out there, and they all have different requirements. They might want it in the native language. They might want it in a different format. So how do I go from my standard format that's approved, reviewed, and is what I have created, to dynamically generating content without a user having to sit there and copy and paste and cut and and kind of create, that takes days and weeks and months? How can I make that faster? So in this scenario here, we've got a core data sheet that we've loaded up, which we can view, and we can see from it, there's this information that exists within this core data sheet. And this is all in componentized now. And we could come back in and say, okay, well, let's look at, how do I translate that into an SMPC? So we'll start from an English standpoint. I only picked the first 3 sections for this demo, but I'm following the QRD template, and I want to apply and say, okay, take the section here. I want you to actually dynamically generate using an LLM. I'll go ahead and open the screen up. I want you to create this content. So I'm driving content out of something I've already indexed. I'm building a RAG process now where I'm automating a workflow, and then I'm ultimately going to output it to the screen, the result of that, using that data. So what does that look like? Well, if we go in and look at the English version, we can go ahead and view that real quick. We only have 3 sections. We'll see that it's following the QRD. It's pulled out the drug name, the dosage, and the form. It's written out language around the QRD template in context using the data I fed it. It's built a table dynamically, right? And filled it in accordance to what the pharmaceutical form wants within the QRD template. And it did this all automatically. But what's powerful here is I also, at the same time, created one where one other attribute that I added was, I want to translate this into Spanish, okay? So at the same time, in parallel, I'm generating a Spanish version of that. And you can see here, it's translated all the content dynamically with the LLM, and it's, into Spanish. So
now the reality, Brian, that's not a certified copy, but the reality is that is something you could feed off to somebody that's going to be doing your certification for you, and at least a starting point, correct?
Yeah, that's it. 0 to first draft in seconds. handing it to the human in the loop to take it the rest of the way.
I mean, why don't you talk about one of the earlier webinars, how you saved somebody almost a couple $1 million just in translation costs alone?
Yeah, we have a customer that basically came to us. They were spending $2 million a year on doing certified translations. And it was taking a long time. It was literally taking, months to get the translations for these documents. In this case, they were SOPs. So we were dealing with SOPs within the organization. And when they came back, they would be distributed the translations to the regions, and the regions were saying, well, they're not quite right. And so they had to go through another edit cycle. And so what we were able to do is say, look, we can do that exact same thing. You create your English version of your SOP, your global SOP. You hit one button through a data flow. We translate it into 25 different languages and transmit it directly to the region to review. We have a reviewer, an edit, there's a feedback loop process. There's all kinds of to streamline that, but they can make those edits real time. And we went from what was taking months down to doing it in a matter of days and creating all of these, and getting them into a format that they agreed upon, then put it through a workflow, right? It gets approved and locked down. And then that translation is the translation that goes forward. But we went from spending we literally 2 million a year to a fraction of that, a small fraction, to be honest, of that, and get the same result and get it done in less than a week.
Now,
That's
Brian, we're talking about generative AI here.
Yeah.
Let's take that same process you just talked about that was around translation.
Mhm.
Let's say I'm going to take my product and we're going to now, during the submission process, we typically submit, you got module 1 through 5, you got everything. Typically the ones that change the most, module 1, because it's going to be all around country specific information.
Mhm.
What if I now can say, hey, I'm going to check off a whole bunch of different countries that we're going to submit in. And what if we've got something special for each one of those countries, a different module 1 documents that are out there, and we can generate that whole packet on the fly. Again, that zero to first draft is huge, isn't it?
Right. It's incredibly huge. And the beauty of this is the way we process this data, you're looking at an HTML representation of a view. Of course, I could export and download this and open it up in Word. But what's powerful is we process everything in JSON, right? So this is what looks behind, right? But we're not going to get into that. What do they want when you submit it? XML, right? All the agencies want everything to be submitted in XML. We also output this in XML format, right? So this same structure can be put into an agency neutral format. It can be fed into a structured content management system. You can manage it within your own system. I mean, there's a lot of options that are available on the table here, but the idea is that we can easily push that into, any format that you want it to go in. And it's all dynamic. It's all happening by the engine itself without humans having to go through that first step of doing all the cutting and the pasting and the creating, which is very painful and time consuming.
Hang on, Brian. We have a question coming in. Brian, you mentioned the classifications required at least 25 proprietary data to fine-tune the pre-trained model built from public data. Can you show how well the fine-tuned model performed compared to the baseline model? And how many more proprietary data to be provided to make the performance of the fine-tuned model reach an acceptable level? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. 25, we've had great success with 25 depending on the content types. Okay. And the content types, the types of documents that we crawl have a lot to do with it. If you have a lot of nuances from one type to another type, and I'll give you a good example. Let me switch back gears over here and go back over to the classification screen. Here we go. If you get into like a 1571 to a 1572, right? Not a lot of difference between those. And because they're very form-based, we actually would want to have more. So in our demo environment, this is a demo environment that I'm running here. We used 150 to train on that to start to get accuracy levels that are greater than 98%, right? In its prediction. And that's important, right? You can set the threshold. It's all totally configurable on what you want it to be, but we're always looking for our accuracy level to be as high as possible. And then when it's not, it kicks out in a default life science document mode or document or life science document, one or the other, depending on how you set it up. These are all life science document mode for the master class. And then you classify it. And the beauty is, if it doesn't get it right, it's easy to reclassify it. When you reclassify it, it adds to the feedback loop. The next time training happens, it's going to pick up those changes and it's going to get smarter over time. Hope that answered the question.
It did for me. That was pretty good. Thank you, Brian. Well, we're coming up on 15 minutes left. I want to open it up if anybody else has other questions. I know that one of the big questions a lot of people ask me about, particularly for any AI-based systems, is how do you deal with validation? What are you using for validation sets, and how can we make sure that we're not biasing our data?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's two forms, there's the implementation validation, which you know quite well and can speak to, because that's where we have this all running in a GXP, environment. And, we've gone through all of the validation checks. When you start talking about validating data flows and that sort of process, there absolutely are a lot of components that exist within our platform to add checks, to add automated checks. So when you think of building out data flows, they're really like workflows, human workflows, but they're AI based. And you snap together what we call pipes, in order to create a pipeline. And you can kind of think of it like a pipeline in your house, right? It's made up of a bunch of plumbing parts, and you have elbows and Ys and Ts and all kinds of stuff like that to route water around and stuff like that. Same concept. We have those same kind of components, but they're AI components that we can use to validate and check. So we can have a database lookup that says, okay, we transformed something, we used AI to generate it, now vet it against this database, or run it against a set of code to check to make sure that it meets our criteria or is within our structure. So all of those automated steps can be added into the data flow in order to check and output results to make sure that what you're outputting is good. This gets back to what I said in the beginning. How do we get to controlled, scalable, and repeatable, processes that we can trust and that can be validated? So we have mechanisms for doing that type of audit, and everything is audited, right? Everything's tracked. So you can go back and you can do analysis against those audits to make sure things are in compliance with what you want.
That's great. Other things, Brian, other things we want to talk about, particularly around generative AI?
I mean, on the generative side, it's so crazy, the power of what it's able to do, and all the use cases that have been coming at us, and that we've been working on with customers already to date. It's quite amazing. There's a lot of analysis being done, especially on the kind of content that is like rich media. So you start thinking about the amount of video content, and it's not just commercials, right? Yeah. Sometimes you think video, you think, oh, all the pharma commercials that you see when you're watching the football game or whatever, right? And there's so many of them. But there's other video aspects of things. There's manufacturing video these days, because they're monitoring the manufacturing line, and we could do anomaly detection for things that seem not right, label detection, on the fly, and being able to analyze stuff like that. There's a lot of video stuff being put out now around SOP and quality control, training video, that kind of data. How do you interpret and analyze that? And the other one is one that we talked about recently. You've got interviews going on now, like in the clinical trial process, where they're videoing the interview, and they're not necessarily collecting data as much now, purely just on a forum where somebody's typing it in. There's also sort of a conversation going back and forth with the patient, and how do you collect and gain intelligence from that type of stuff? This is where our system can analyze that and bring that intelligence forward and turn it into that same structure that we saw already, and be able to use it to help drive processes forward.
Well, I think that's important, because actually some clinical trials that we've been involved in the past have had interaction between a clinician and a patient, and you've got to rate that scenario. The nice part is you can actually use AI to help rate that, and then the raters are actually looking at what it looks at so you keep that human in the loop concept on that. But it can actually identify areas that may be certain things that, when you're looking at some quality of life scales, could indicate that there are issues going on. So it could alert people to some of those things that it may see in that. And the fact that you can actually do that on the fly is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like, for example, like, I mean, we always use this one because it just happens to be what's in the demo system, right? Going to do an image-based search on baseball player. And what I'm getting back now are a whole bunch of images of somebody playing baseball, right? And so I could click on one of those images and open it up, and I see this image. Clearly, person's got a baseball bat, actions going on here, baseball's being played. And you'll see here, not only did we extract the text off of that, but what's important is that this was inside of a video, right? So we jump back to that video and we see here, these are frames within a video that we're analyzing. And so that level of analysis on any kind of type of video could be done, and you can do queries, just like that. I think we've done some examples here where we say, right here, this one I like, difficulty, swallowing, and we could do a search on that and just straight out search where we're looking for, a problem or an issue or a side effect possible, right? That may be occurring here. And so when we do that search, we see the results come back, and the first hit's a video, right? We jump to it and we see, oh, we've identified that. So that transcription of that video, interpreting and understanding it from within the segment. And of course, we can even jump you right to that section.
Difficulty breathing or swallowing. Stop taking.
We understand that level of analysis. And so this is powerful. And we do this not just obviously with video, we do it with all content, but it's having that level of understanding, those types of relationships, and that knowledge is what drives true RAG process forward. You can't really do a true RAG process, as we're talking about today, to vet and verify generative AI if you don't first understand and interpret the data that you have within your environment to tell it to do what you want it to do.
It's interesting, Brian, but I'm involved in an AI working group with DIA, Drug Information Association, and we actually renamed ourselves Intelligent Automation because we felt that AI was too broad a topic and people didn't understand it as much. So we wanted to take in all the aspects of AI with intelligent automation. But one of the things that I found interesting was the regulatory people in general. Most of the regulatory people a year and a half ago were saying we would never use generative AI to create documents that we would think about submitting to the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward a year later, and all of a sudden they can't try to get the systems fast enough to generate that first concept. So I think in that very short period of time, with ChatGPT coming out, it almost kind of opened up everybody's thinking process to what can I actually generate and how can this help me do my job? I think one of the major aspects that I see in this industry is that a lot of people are getting to the tail ends of their career. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that we have embedded in some of those people that have been in this industry for a long time. They're going to retire. Those people, we need to utilize labor across the board. We need them to train and teach other people, the younger people, how to deal with this stuff. But most importantly, to teach the machine learning algorithms how best to identify the data to help out with that going forward. So for me, I think that's a huge area that we can work with and work with those people on doing that. And, not to cut people's jobs out, but to enhance their job so that it's much more rewarding in what they're doing. And they're not doing the manual labor, but they're doing more meaningful labor.
Right. Exactly. No, I totally agree. And it's interesting you brought up ChatGPT, and I do agree. It transitioned and changed, the talking point of what can generative AI, again, like we're in agreement. AI is a very overused word, but it's what everybody's used to right now. So, but what can be done with these technologies, right? What the what if, right? The power of what if. And the thing is what we've learned too, and we're seeing you and I both are seeing this constantly. It's like, well, we do want to do this, but wait a minute, we don't want to push our data out. It's important to understand that we can achieve these same results, everything we're seeing and everything we're doing, without your data ever leaving what you deem your firewall, right? So we don't push it to these. Now you can if you want. We do have integration. If you want to use ChatGPT, it's a switch, right? You turn it on, you put your credentials, boom, and we'll use it if you want us to use it. But the default, it can do everything that we've seen here. Not one thing went out of our firewall. We didn't go to ChatGPT to process anything. We didn't send anything off, outside of our, safety net, if you will. And that's important because we can achieve these results without your IP, a customer's IP, getting outside of, their reach.
In the final minutes that we have, Brian, one thing that I want to tell the audience to think about is the bigger the company you are, the more likely you have loads of data that's all over the place and it's in legacy systems, or it's data you may have bought 10 companies, 20 companies over the course of the years. Think of how much data is locked in those old company records that you now no longer do with. Think about, could we index into all that old data and would we find something meaningful out of that data? I keep, when I'm in these regulatory and these clinical meetings, I talk to people about, you can learn as much from your submissions that didn't go through, that didn't get approved, as you can from the approved submissions. So think in terms of doing something there. You may learn things not to say on your next submission to a regulatory authority that got flagged within that submission. So those are areas I think broaden your thinking around how you can use this information and kind of pull that stuff back.
Absolutely.
I think we're at the tail end here. Any final thoughts, Brian, for the crowd?
No, definitely we'd love to talk to you. We'll reach out to you. We'd like to talk about some of the issues you're facing, no pressure. We're just always wanting to learn. That's the way we are. But, and if we can help, let us know. We want to help out.
Yeah. And from our end, anybody that, we've been in this field for 30 years. We think we understand a lot about different areas within life science. So we would love to help you out and talk about how do you stay compliant while incorporating these new technologies in your workflow. So please reach out to us. We will have this posted on our website. So if you want to share this with other people, please do. Thank you very much. Roy, any final thoughts or anything you want to talk to the crowd about?
No, just thank you, Keith, and thank you, Brian, and thank you to all our attendees for a great conversation. And we look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.